Alright, hello everybody, this is Dr. Keen. We're going to go over the fourth part of the nervous system today. Sorry I wasn't able to be in class, but this is just to give you a couple extra pointers on the side, a little bit more information about what's on the slides. I'll go through each one with you, and then at the end make sure you answer the question that was left for you, and whether you're virtual or in person, make sure you answer that question as your assignment for today. So we've gone through how the nervous system works. We've gone through some of the parts of the nervous system and how it's broken down. We've gone through how nerve signals travel through a neuron. We've also gone through the parts of the brain and different areas of the brain that control different things in your body. So today we're going to take it one next step and talk about other parts of the brain and how those affect signals that go into your body. We talked about the general cerebrum and the cerebellum and just kind of named those things, but we're going to look a little deeper into the brain today. So if you look at the brain, deep in the center, you have this area that's called the diencephalon, this whole area right here. So this outside part, the wrinkled part that we looked at last week, that's called the cerebrum, right? It's got the gyri and the sulci in there, and that's mostly gray matter on the outside and white matter on the inside, mostly. There are a little bit of gray matter inside that white matter. Remember, those are called basal nuclei in there. But right here, in the center of the brain, so this is kind of looking through the brain in this picture, is called the diencephalon. There's multiple parts to that. It's called the thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. Well, the thalamus is kind of the center of it, so that's why the other two parts are refer to the thalamus. Hypo, remember, means below. Epi means upon. So that's kind of explains the location of those parts. So if you look at a brain from the side here, this right in this area is the diencephalon. And we looked at this diagram before in other sections of the nervous system. This is just kind of cutting out all that extra stuff and looking at what we're really talking about here. So here's the thalamus right here, right in the middle. And then here's the hypothalamus, which is below the thalamus. So that's where that name comes from. And then the pineal gland is over here, which is part of the epithalamus, which is right upon that thalamus on the back end of it right there. Pineal gland actually is a gland that helps you sleep. That's what secretes melatonin. So if you take a melatonin supplement, your body actually makes natural melatonin. It's how you go to sleep at night. So that's where it comes from, right there, right in the middle of your brain. So here's the diencephalon, those three parts right there. So let's look at each part individually. The thalamus. Okay, so here's how you should think about the thalamus. The thalamus is basically like a router. It's, just like in your house, you have wireless internet, right? And you have that router in the middle of your house somewhere that receives an internet signal and sends it out so that you can receive it on all your other devices, your phone, your tablet, your computer, all those things that can link onto that wireless internet, Wi-Fi. That is what the thalamus is, like that router. So it's kind of like a transition point and a relay station that brings impulses from the brain out to the body and from the body into the brain. And it kind of like determines where that signal has to go from there. So it's a relay station, just like that router that you have in your room, in your house for your Wi-Fi. Hypothalamus is right below the thalamus. Now the hypothalamus is extremely important. This thing controls all kinds of things in your body. Your body would fall apart and stop working if your hypothalamus was not working, because from this area it determines your body temperature, it determines your heart rate, it determines the amount of breaths you take each minute, it determines what hormones will be secreted, it determines the pH of your blood, it determines whether you are thirsty or hungry or sleepy or awake. All those things are controlled from the hypothalamus. So obviously extremely important part of the brain, and it's a relay station for the endocrine system, which regulates hormones and everything. So water balances all kinds of things, the way that you break down food when you eat it, all that stuff. So and an important part of that hypothalamus is the limbic system. If you were in class last week, I talked about Inside Out, the Disney movie Inside Out, and I told you that whole movie takes place in the limbic system. Remember, she's got those long-term memories that she's storing away, and she's got those emotions in there, right? And anger, sadness, joy, disgust, and fear. They're all in there, right? That is your limbic system. So they're hanging out in the limbic system in that movie. So that's what a big part of the hypothalamus, and that hypothalamus is regulating all those things from the bottom of the brain below the thalamus, right in this area right here. So there's a location. Also, right off the hypothalamus, you have the pituitary gland that hangs off of there. And I've mentioned that a few times in other sections. I mentioned it the other day. That pituitary gland is basically like the brain of your endocrine system or your hormonal system. From the pituitary gland, this is going to send out signals and hormones and stimulators that are going to stimulate other glands that will make them do what they're supposed to do. The pituitary gland comes down and stimulates the thymus gland to do what it's supposed to do. It stimulates the thyroid gland, the adrenal gland. All the glands in your body are regulated by what the pituitary gland can do, and that pituitary gland is regulated by the hypothalamus, which receives signals from the brain. So, extremely important part of the brain as well. In the epithalamus, mentioned this a minute ago, you have the pineal gland. The pineal gland is part of your endocrine system, and it secretes what's called melatonin, and that is a big part of your wakefulness. So this makes you fall asleep when you go to bed. When you go to bed and you put your head on your pillow, you close your eyes, your pineal gland starts secreting that melatonin so that you fall asleep. That melatonin is a very common supplement. I'm just going to say one quick side note here. If you need melatonin to go to sleep, you got to be careful taking it too much, because your body actually has a negative feedback loop that occurs with hormones. And so your body naturally secretes melatonin, right? So if you continuously take supplements on a regular basis, like on a nightly basis, eventually your body starts to think, oh, we have plenty of melatonin, so we don't need to make it anymore, or we don't need to make as much. And so over time, the pineal gland starts to get kind of weaker, and it secretes less, and so then you become kind of reliant on that melatonin supplement. Eventually you need it, you have to have it to go to sleep, otherwise you're not going to be able to fall asleep. So just be careful. I mean, it's not a bad thing every once in a while, but just be careful taking it on a frequent basis. And it's just a side note, because I know a lot of people in our society have kind of taken that on as part of their supplementation. Also inside the epithalamus is what's called the choroid plexus. You should know what this is called and what that is, what that means. The choroid plexus in here is a bunch of knots of capillaries, a bunch of blood vessels that are all kind of wound together, and those actually form cerebral spinal fluid. We talked about cerebral spinal fluid a few times already in this chapter. I've just kind of mentioned it a few times, and it's housed inside the ventricles, inside the brain. It also flows up and down the spinal cord, and we've talked about it a few times. The choroid plexus is where it is produced, right in the epithalamus there. So you should know what that choroid plexus is and what it does. Okay, the brain stem is the next part right here. It's about the size of your thumb in diameter, so pretty thick, and it's about 3 inches long. And this is extremely important as well. I mean, of course, all the parts of your nervous system are extremely important, but this part has a lot of nerves that are coming off of it called cranial nerves that actually control everything that goes on in your head and neck area, and your shoulders too. Actually, your trapezius muscle is controlled by a cranial nerve that comes off the brain stem here. So a bunch of small gray matter areas that form those cranial nerves and control a lot of your vital activities. There's a cranial nerve 10, which is called it's called the wanderer. It's the anatomical name for it is called the vagus nerve, but it's called the wanderer because it comes from there and it goes throughout your whole body. Basically, controls a lot of functions in your whole body. It's not the only nerve that controls those functions, but it has a part in a lot of the everyday functions that you have, and that's coming right from the brainstem. So it's actually 12 cranial nerves that come off of there, but 10 is really important for everyday function. So here's the parts of the brainstem right here. These three parts right here. You got the midbrain, which is right at the bottom of the brain, the pons, and then the medulla oblongata, which is here. So midbrain is right connected to the brain. So, and I've talked to you about this a couple times now, that the spinal cord and the brainstem are not a separate part from the brain. It's basically a continuation of the brain, right? That you got the brain tissue up here, and then it continues right down into the brainstem to travel down into the spinal cord. So you have all of this going on that's controlling a lot of different functions in your body. And we'll look at those a little more in depth in a different section, but right now we're just kind of looking at what they are. So midbrain is the top part. It's mostly composed of tracts of nerve fibers which are bringing information down from the brain, and it's basically two bulges, cerebral peduncles, which really means little feet of the cerebrum. So they're underneath the cerebrum, and like I said, that's a continuation of the cerebrum, and that's forming the tissue that's going to eventually become the spinal cord coming off the bottom. So conveys information from the body to the brain and from the brain to the body. There's 4 rounded protrusions called corpora quadrigemina coming off the bottom there, and those are reflex centers which help with vision and hearing. Pons is the next part. This bulging part right here that kind of sticks out the front. This brain is facing to our left right now. So this is the anterior part and this is the posterior part. So this little bulge coming out the anterior part of the brainstem right there, that's called the pons. And it's mostly composed of fiber tracts that allows for nerve signals to go up and down. And this is where your breathing control mostly comes from. So that's obviously extremely important as well. Medulla oblongata, down at the bottom of the brainstem, lowest part, and that eventually becomes the spinal cord. And again, a lot of things being controlled there: heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, swallowing, vomiting, all those things. So like a lot of the cranial nerves come right from this area. They come from the pons and the medulla that control a lot of different things. The nerve that controls your gag reflex, if you've ever, kind of, some people, I'm sure most people have experienced it. If you reach a little too far back in your throat, you get that little feeling like you're going to throw up almost. That's called a gag reflex, and that's actually controlled by your cranial nerves that come off right from this area. And it's actually a defense mechanism to prevent things from going too far down into your throat. Reticular formation is the last part that is gray matter along the brainstem, and this is actually allows you to determine whether you're awake or asleep in your consciousness. So damage to this area would cause a coma. So if somebody had a really significant damage to the brainstem here, it could affect the reticular formation, which could affect your consciousness and then could put you into a coma. So last thing is the cerebellum, and cerebellum controls a lot of balance and equilibrium and your proprioception, which is your sense of being able to determine what's going on around you. And that's what they test when they do tests for driving under the influence and stuff, because that's what can be hindered. And that is part 4.